Welcome to Season 4 of Stroller Coaster. It's the podcast that takes you on the wild ride of parenting that we're all on together, created by Munchkin, the most loved baby lifestyle brand in the world. I'm Lynn Smith. I am so excited to be back with you. And with me, as always, my co-host, Justin. Hey, Justin.
Hello, Lynn. Great to be back. Season 4. It's our season.
Yes, it is. So let's get cozy. Grab your sippy cups. And let's get to it. Today, we're talking about daily transitions. We've all been there, right? Like you're going from the playground, having to go home. The kids are freaking out. Or even just the transition from bath time to bedtime. I mean, think about it. There's so many transitions every day that our kids deal with. Justin, for you, like what's hardest when it comes to the girls?
I feel like right now we're in a real phase with going from breakfast to being dressed. Turns into like almost a rodeo in my house. It's like a real
That's actually fun.
Run, catch. Yeah, it's fun. It's really fun.
It's total chaos in these transitions. For us, it's nighttime, right? Like they have been focused, whether it's at school or at camp, all day long. And I'm like, hey guys, time for dinner. Let's go to dinner. Now we got to go to bed. Our lives are about to change because Rebecca Schrag Hershberg is with us. She wrote the Tantrum Survival Guide. She was also the director of an infant and toddler mental health program at a major New York children's hospital. She's got lots of tips for us. And then we're going to hear this touching story of a mom, Marie Holmes, how her son and how she handled a really big transition. So let's get to it. Let's start the show. Rebecca, I am so glad you're here. I really struggle with this as a parent, as I know everyone that's listening does, because when our kids want to do something, peeling them away from it is so very challenging. And this happened to me just last night, and I was chuckling because I'm preparing for this episode. And I had to stand in front of the television that my 5-year-old was trying to change the channel of. And I said to him, I was like, do you see me? Can you hear me? It is time for dinner. And this is after saying it's time for dinner 100 times. So I was chuckling to myself thinking, well, Rebecca, first question is, what do we do in these situations when our kids just do not want to make that transition to the next thing?
I think you nailed it with the word want. Because this only happens when the next thing is something that they don't actually want to do compared to the thing they're doing, right? If you had said, hey guys, it's time for ice cream, I don't think you would have needed to stand in front of the TV. Dinner to dessert, notoriously smooth, right? It's always from something that they're doing that they're really enjoying to something that they're going to enjoy less. And so I think the first tip would be to just acknowledge that for them, to just name that, so instead of coming in with the warning of just, it's dinner time, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, come on, I've told you a million times, what do you think I'm going to say? I'm here with something that's kind of a bummer.
Yeah,
do you smell what I smell?
Attention.
Do you smell the right, exactly. And then say, I know this is a bummer and you guys are really liking the show or whatever. And often kids are really responsive to that because they feel like as much as they don't want to do the thing, you get that they don't want to do the thing. And that in and of itself is validating and sort of gets them feeling like they're on your team and you're on their team, and that makes them want to cooperate more.
How do we plan and in turn prepare our children for these transitions? So is it setting a timer or saying, hey, in 5 minutes, this is going to be happening? What's the best way to plan for it? Because I've tried the timer technique. It doesn't work as much because for my children, they don't have a concept of time. They're just like, okay, yeah, whatever, mom.
Right. Kids don't have a concept of time. They don't have a concept of late, right? That whole idea of like, I'm going to be late for work. We're going to be late to the doctor. They have no idea what that means. I think the only timers that can be really useful, actually, no matter the age of the kid, within reason, obviously, are like a sand timer. And there's something called a time timer, which is almost it's a timer that you can like pull out what ends up looking kind of like a slice of pie, like if you picture a round timer, and then they see the slice of pie getting smaller and smaller as the time goes. And so that's a visual representation that can be helpful for them. The other thing you can do is name an activity, right? So I'm going to go into the kitchen and I'm going to stir the pasta, and then I'm going to come back out and it'll be dinner time. And so giving them kind of something that they can picture, that they know generally how long it takes, can be helpful depending on the age of the kids. The word plan also implies expectation, and part of it is a parent expectation. It's just, I'm going to plan for my kids to be really bummed that it's time to turn off the TV and not to go straight to dinner. And I'm going to build in 5 or 10 minutes there of them just being whining and upset and irritated, and that's okay. And that happens every night. And so better for me to just plan it and expect it and be pleasantly surprised than the other way around.
What's something that we can do to help our children to transition from going to the park to getting into their car seat and having to go home?
It's thinking about what does the car seat represent? So I know a lot of times parents will say that their kids have a particularly hard time getting into the car seat in the morning. But what they're not necessarily taking into account is that is for the kids what represents separation, right? Once they're in their car seat, then they're almost at daycare or preschool, and then they say goodbye to you. And so it might be that it has nothing to do with the car seat, but it has to do with acknowledging that you can't wait to give them a huge giant hug to say goodbye, which you'll do when, whatever it is, it's thinking about what's below this, perhaps. Now, there are kids for whom it's actually from a sensory perspective, really uncomfortable. And they sell, little cushions that can make it more comfortable. Then it's, again, this anticipation. What is this about for my kid? Is it a sensory discomfort? Is it where we're going? Can it be made more fun with a game, with a race? I would say I'm going to close my eyes, and there's no way that I'm going to be able to hear you get into your car seat. You couldn't possibly do it quietly enough that I'll be able to hear you. And then I would hear them get into their car seat, and I would be like, come on, guys. I said now, and they're giggling. And I'm like, guys, we have to get in, so bringing in humor, bringing in playfulness is always something to try too.
That's so smart. The idea of giving them a little agency, especially I love them pulling a prank on you, makes them feel like they're in charge. Got mom. Oh man, we got her good. Then all of a sudden you're in the car and you don't even have to think about it again.
I think it's such a good point. And I find that the hardest transitions are at the end of the day and then at the beginning of the day. Getting them to bed and getting them launched out the door. And my anxiety is coming up like, come on, we got to go. We got to get out the door. And they're almost feeding off of that.
I used to do home observations, and I would observe bedtimes a lot because that was where the pain points were. A parent always wants bedtime to go faster than a kid. Nighttime is the largest separation of the day. Parents are so ready for it, and kids never want it to happen. And so I got to the point where I could predict, the mom would be reading a story, let's say, to the kid, and I would say to myself, this mom is going to check out in 5, 4, 3, and you could see, her whole face changed, she was just done. And the second she was done, the kid got clingier and whinier. Because what the kid needed was to feel like, no, this mom is actually really here and present with me. And it's a little bit of that quality quantity thing. I'm going to really focus on my kid, either at bedtime or in the morning. I'm going to make this fun. I'm going to, in the morning, I'm going to put on a song. I'm going to get myself ready before I'm even dealing with my kid. I'm going to really focus on my kid and be connected. That's going to go much smoother.
Something that you're saying that really is resonating with me is having empathy for where the kids are in these transitions. Where are your children? And I noticed now that my older one, he's 8 now, and the little one can't do this, but he's able to say to me, Mom, I've been sitting in my school chair all day long. And I'm like, oh, right. These kids have been structured all day long. So when they get home, I would imagine we have to, as parents, be mindful that we are not structuring from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. before they go to bed.
We call them high demand times. High demand times are, mornings and evenings when there's 25 things that you need to demand that your kids do. And they start to feel like you're, a military commander or something. There's, a lot of talk about a piggy bank, right? And those are the times of day that you're just making withdrawals. Brush your teeth, put on your pajamas, do this, don't do this, did it. That's like nonstop referrals. Well, of course, you're going to draw down your bank account, and then they have no motivation to sort of keep going. And so sometimes as parents, because we get so anxious that they have to do these things, it's our own anxiety that's it's not how we would talk to another human being. Do this, do that, do that, And so being very conscious to pepper in, I'm going to tell you a funny story about my day. I'm going to tell you what you're doing really, really well and that I appreciate. Whatever it is, just making sure that the things that are coming out of your mouth are not primarily bank withdrawals, but they're actually bank deposits. And there's 3 questions that I often tell parents to ask. Does this have to happen? Does this have to happen now? Because it might be a situation where you could just cuddle on the couch for a few minutes and then take a bath, and that might make the difference. And does this have to happen in this way? So, for example, I'm noticing that I'm screaming at my kid to get out the door in the morning. Even in the middle of doing that, stopping and asking myself, do I have to do it? Is there a fire? Literally, that would be an example of, yeah, I do have to do it in this way. Something like I might be 2 minutes late to our doctor's appointment. I don't have to do it in this way. I can pause. I can maybe put on a song. I could turn this into a game. Kids don't want to leave the playground, right? 3, 4, 5-year-olds, they don't want to leave the playground. Most parents are ready to leave the playground. So first, there's a discrepancy there. Typically, you might say, come on, it's time to go. Come on, hey. And first of all, you're yelling from across the playground a lot of the time, which is the other thing that doesn't work so well with little kids. And you're getting more and more irritated because they seem like they're ignoring you. And they might be ignoring you, or they may just not have you in focus. Instead, walk over. Say, okay, you want to go down the slide one more time. We're going to make this a challenge. You go down the slide, then you spin around in a circle, and then while you're singing Old MacDonald, you run to the playground gate and give me a high five, and I'll be there waiting. Ready? Go. That's going to be a whole different ballgame.
Rebecca, this has just been, it's been so enlightening and so helpful because it's things that I can do tonight. I'm not going to be standing in front of the TV screaming, did you hear me? But the preparation, validating them, regulating ourselves. I mean, there's just so much here that are actionable things that we can walk away with. Thank you for being with us.
So glad. My pleasure. You have to let me know how it goes.
I will. Justin, that was my biggest takeaway is like you have to be mindful of not invalidating what they're going through and then also being aware of what's going on with you because of how impactful our emotions are on our children.
I agree. Like, I love that because I feel like we're just as vulnerable to the routine of it all. Like the bedtime transition is the hardest one in our household because we're tired. And then so we're like, all right, it's time. And then everyone's like mad at the same time. And I just feel like we can see it coming every day. And it's just that one moment of mindfulness to really be like, okay, let's do it this way tonight, rather than just starting it and falling into the sort of bad transition trap.
I realize the end of the day is hardest for all of us parents because we've gone through hours and hours and hours of stressors, whether that's at work, at home, then our children have been going through hours of structure. And the biggest takeaway for me was something that I've been doing wrong the whole time, no surprise, but go to bed. It's time for bed. Get upstairs. Go do this. It's the commands that I didn't realize how many withdrawals I was taking from their bank rather than those deposits of, here we go. Let's go upstairs together. Let's get ready for bed. Describing it, painting that picture that screaming, it's time for bed, is actually doing the exact opposite of what we want. So it's almost like, why wouldn't we make some of these changes? Because not only is it going to make it easier for our children in these transitions that we know are really challenging, but it's going to make it easier for us as parents.
And I actually did a little research about how kids process time. Big part of transitions. Kids understand time so differently than we do as adults, and research finds that as young as 3, kids as young as 3 can easily put events in order as they occur, but they have no concept of how long it took to do each of those things. So of course they're like, when it takes 20 minutes to go from the playground to the car, that's meaningless to them. So like the actual perception of time is different. We're counting the seconds, and they have like an infinite amount of time.
Right. That would obviously be why when I always say, like, get out the door, we only have a few minutes. They're like, oh, yeah, okay, what does a few minutes mean? Justin, do your kids ever fall asleep in the most random places? You know those videos online that's like kids falling asleep in their spaghetti and things like that?
Yes, exclusively random places. My kids love a stroller nap. I've logged so many miles walking around my block, given a stroller nap.
Who doesn't? So Munchkin has something really cool. It would have helped us on those walks. It's called the night owl stroller.
Yes, I love a night stroll.
Me too. So here's what it is. The Night Owl stroller lights up even in the darkest pathways with simple one-touch lights, and it's overhead approved, so it's easy to take with you on any destination.
This is great. When you're up late strolling with your kids, you need a nightlight.
Of course you do. So you can click the link in the description of the show, and you can actually get a discount if you use the code podcast. We're talking about daily transitions, but what happens when there's a bigger transition coming and you have to tell your child about it? Here is our correspondent Fleece with the parenting story of the day.
Marie's son's world was about to change, only he didn't know it yet.
My son loved his school. His best friend had always been in his class with him. He had a tight little group of friends there that were his whole social network, and it was really his world. In the mornings when we were all getting ready, he was always the first one, and he would be standing at the door with his backpack, eagerly awaiting his trip to school that day.
Marie and her wife found another school for their son that had the kind of learning environment he needed in order to thrive.
This was a decision that we really agonized over. Logically, we knew that in the long term, this was the right decision for him. But we also knew that it was going to be a big blow. We wanted to put it off so that he wouldn't have so much time to be upset. But we also wanted to give him a chance to say goodbye to his friends and his teachers. We waited until there were only a few weeks left in the school year, chose the date and circled it on the calendar and prepared to break the news at that moment.
The day she was dreading finally came. It was unusual for her to pick him up without his sister, but she wanted time alone with him.
I walked up to the school. My stomach was in knots. I felt so nervous because I didn't know how this was going to go. He'd been at that school since he was such a little guy. And my anxiety bought this package of peanut butter cups, which are his favorite candy, in the hopes that this would somehow, blunt the impact of what I was about to do. I stood there on the curb with the other parents, waiting, watching every face that came out the door. There he was, smiling with his backpack, walking with his friends, and he found my face and was confused. That, I wanted to talk to you about something, which I thought sounded sort of non-threatening, but it was actually terrifying for him. And his face just went white, and he said, "Is everything okay? Did somebody die?" And I said, no, everything's fine, which I wanted to believe. I guided him into this little garden and said, "Let's sit here." We sat on this bench, and I said, "Do you remember talking to this teacher from another school a while back?" And he said, "Yeah. They think that you are a perfect fit for that school, and they would love to have you there. And Mom and I think that you should go." His jaw sort of dropped when he realized what this was going to mean. He was shocked and he was mad. He said, "I can't believe this is happening." It was just heartbreaking. My heart was breaking. My instinct was to try to soften the blow a little bit by explaining, we're not moving cities. You'll still be able to see all your friends. But he was extremely upset. We took the subway home. He didn't want to look me in the eye, and he didn't want to talk to me. And when we got home, he ran into his room and shut the door behind him. When I knocked, he said, "Don't come in." I was standing there, staring at the door, knowing he was on the other side, in so much pain. I wanted to be there with him, and I wanted to make it better. And I thought, I really messed this up.
To help the transition, she said, "Let's try it for a year." When the first day of school came, she asked how it went.
He said, "I'm not telling you anything." And I said, "Okay, I'll wait." I was relieved that he saw this as my fault and wasn't blaming himself. But I was sad that he didn't want to share anything with me the way I had known so much about his life at his old school.
Then she had an idea.
I asked him, "Do you want to come walk the dog with me in the park?" And he said, "Okay." Little by little, he sort of let slip small pieces of information about how school was going.
It was these smaller, more spontaneous conversations that led to more connection and a realization.
I found that it was in these unplanned moments where he was engaged in something else that sometimes there would be a little opening. What I realized was a series of conversations that needed to happen with him. Instead of dropping the news as sort of one big bomb after picking him up that day from school, I wish instead that I had planted seeds along the way so that he could grow used to the idea. I might have mentioned, do you remember this other school that we heard about? Or if there was a struggle with homework, I might say, they teach this differently at other schools. Do you think it would be helpful if someone could teach this to you in a different way? I didn't need to try to cram it all into a few moments to make the duration of the pain shorter. What he needed was some more time and some more space to process what was happening.
This can also apply to other big transitions in life.
In the same way that if you were moving to a different city, you might say, I wonder what it's like to live in an apartment building with an elevator. If you're preparing your child for a new sibling, you might say, what do you think it feels like to be a big brother?
Then one day she knew they had gotten to the other side of the transition.
One morning when we were scurrying around the house trying to get everyone out the door, I look over and he's standing there by the door with his backpack on. And he says, can we go? I need to be on time. I knew that it was going to be okay because clearly this new school was a place where he wanted to be. It was a difficult transition, not just for my son, for all of us. But now that we have weathered this big transition, we know that we can do it together and we can get through whatever life throws at us next time.
A huge takeaway for me, Justin, is you have to prepare your child for these transitions, like little bits of information over a longer period of time, where if you drop this bomb on them seconds before, they don't have time to process this.
And this is something that took me so long to work out because I'm used to engaging with adults where it's like you tell it once, you don't say it 5 times, and you sort of get it out in concisely. But it's the opposite with kids. You have to sort of give information out in small chunks and, repeat it over time.
And then I find if we're worked up, they're going to be worked up. So the more stress in the situation in general. So the big, really overall thing here is as kids, there are so many transitions every single day. For adults, there are so many transitions throughout the day. I mean, just think, really, it's kind of minute by minute. But if we can educate our children on how to handle those daily transitions, we're setting them up with really important life skills. What a great show today. If you have a topic that you really struggle with as a parent, we want to hear about it. You can shoot us an email at podcast@munchkin.com. Thank you to Rebecca Hershberg, also Marie Holmes, for sharing her story. And thank you to Munchkin, who make this podcast possible. If you want to find more about their products, you can go right to munchkin.com.
Check out our podcast for kids called Storytime. It's got great stories, improv actors, funny sounds. It's just nonstop fun.
You know what my son actually, and I love it too, is Fred and the Beanstalk. That's one that he's just like, everything comes to life for him.
Yeah, it's right there in the same feed. You could listen to it right now if you want to. Check it out. It's called Stroller Coaster Storytime.
One thing you may not know is that Munchkin's Wild Love product line was created to educate kids on at-risk animal species and support the International Fund for Animal Welfare. When you support Munchkin, you support wildlife. And that brings us to our moment of calm, our chance to regroup, appreciate nature, and de-stress. Today, let's go to the African Serengeti. This tropical savanna supports unmatched biodiversity and the most massive land animal migration in the world. It's an amazing place to see how deeply these animals are connected to their environment. Feel the peace as you take a grounding breath and enjoy.